do I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? Hello, Diane. How are you?
Hello. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm okay.
Good.
I don't want to lose track. I am giving AF about something, though. Like, seriously, that's on my mind. And this is my Caribbean. I don't want to lose track about what's going on in Jamaica, but not only Jamaica, but in the Caribbean waters, that we haven't gotten the opportunity to be talking about this narrative, this manufactured consent of the U.S. bullying its way into the Caribbean waters and targeting Venezuela, wanting to take control of Venezuela. We already know that Trump started to talk about, renaming the Gulf of Mexico and wanting to incorporate Canada into U.S. territory. And now, blowing people out of the water. There were 83 people on 22 boats since September 2025 that have been aggressed by U.S. military, and CARICOM, which is the Caribbean community of about 15 member states and 5 associate members that have come together to really call for Caribbean waters to remain a zone of peace, because most of the Caribbean people, especially Jamaican people, out of many one people, we don't think about all of these negative vibes of bringing in war and not welcoming a diversity of people to our various islands. And we want to be able to kind of keep and hold that culture. So it's really a serious conversation to be had about what's going on in the Caribbean waters, on top of Jamaica trying to restore itself, determine who their allies are going to be, working with China, working with the United States, working with Canada, working with Britain or the UK on supporting like the rebuilding of the island at this time. And so, we got to talk about when superpowers are becoming less of a superpower, and then they start to like strike out at different places to try to maintain their positionality. So, have you heard about any of these that's going on? What are your thoughts about it?
Oh, so much. I mean, it is. The whole watching all of it happen. It's like once you understand that there's a story being told, it's like a play being written in front of your eyes. Once you understand that, it becomes a little easier to parse through what you're hearing and really kind of see the focus. But I remember a time in my life where I didn't hone in on those messages. And so that's probably been a very different experience for you than it has been for me. Maybe not, but
as a U.S. person, most of the information that we get is some type of manufactured consent, right? Helping us to going along with different war. And then those of us who know the impacts of some of the harm, that's when you see us getting in the streets, stepping out, talking against some of the policies of the U.S. Puts throughout the globe.
So we wanted to talk about manufacturing consent today because it feels like there are so many examples of it right now. I mean, they're, like you said, as a USian, everything that we're told is in the service to manufacturing consent, and I'm definitely learning how to unpack that more. But just in recent months, and certainly, I mean, we haven't even been a year with this president at this point. And so certainly pretty much the entire time he's been in office, and even before that, when he was in office the first time, manufacturing consent was definitely something that he weaponizes on the regular. And I know that we've been watching pretty closely, as you mentioned, the boats that have been blown up and the 83 people that have died as a result in the Caribbean waters. And I want to say out loud, those are international waters. So these are war crimes that are happening when, it doesn't matter that he says he thinks that they're all narco traffickers. It doesn't matter that he says that Pete Hegseth, who is our Secretary of War, doesn't matter what they say. They are executing people without cause, without trial, without probable anything, without no justification whatsoever in international waters, which no country in this world is allowed to do. Whether or not
can you imagine as much drugs and guns as the U.S. Exports off of the island? Can you imagine if any other country decided to just start blowing up planes and boats that they believed had guns and drugs from the U.S.?
Yeah,
what the responsiveness of that would be?
It's incredibly absurd to think that there would not be very swift repercussions to almost any other country. Of course, we've certainly seen that Israel seems to still be able to get away without any repercussions. But Israel is an arm of the U.S., so those two things go hand in hand in terms of the accountability piece. But yeah, it has been something that I've been learning about more deeply, and in terms of how the narrative that we're told about groups of people, about parts of the world, I mentioned to you earlier before we got on that I'm trying not to use the term Middle East.
Yes.
When talking about what's happening in Palestine, because Middle East is a colonial term. And there's a video that I saw on Instagram. I don't know the woman's name. I think she's a scholar of the I almost said Middle East. I need to come up with another term. And she stopped. She was in an interview and she stopped the woman that was interviewing her. The woman used the term Middle East and she stopped her and she said, no, we need to talk about this. You cannot say Middle East. It's middle to whom? Middle. It's all based on the British mindset of how that part of the world is organized. And so there's just so many. We will never get to the bottom of the well of these types of narratives and stories that cause us as a USian public, but then also as a global citizen, causes us to explain away and justify the brutality and weaponization against other humans on the planet for whatever reason, or whatever purpose.
Anti-blackness.
And
even if you don't identify as Black, it's just anything that's non-white is seen as Middle Eastern, outside of Western civilizations, ideologies. And those are the things that are like super harmful, especially when a majority of the globe is non-white, right? The percentages of actual people that exists across the globe is like 89 to 90 something percent of non-whiteness that exists.
You think that's changing though? I have hope that, especially, that's one of the things that I keep hearing Palestinian folks say, and folks that are in support of Palestine, is that Palestine is waking the world up. That the last 2 years have opened up this awareness to the globe about this weaponization of manufacturing consent. And because, what's happening in Palestine is another example of it. And you mentioned the boats, but I'm curious if you think that, if that's really, is it changing, or does it just feel like it's changing because my algorithm says it is? I don't know.
I think that there is a lot of suspended animation of disbelief of, white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And I don't think that people are naming and calling exactly what it is. Like, calling the how does it say? The kettle black?
Not calling the kettle black. Yeah.
But
sure,
and I
that's
think
based on racism too somewhere. That's saying.
But this is like a U.S. tactic. Like if you're thinking about like the history of the development of the United States, all of it came from manufactured consent, even from beginning with Manifest Destiny. Like we are destined to come and control and take over this land and this territory. And then for all of the world wars, all of this like they were anti-German, they were anti-Irish, and there was all of these negative narratives. Like Black and indigenous people weren't even considered in that conversation. So other
Right.
quote unquote white identified people, before they were named as a white, they were named as where they were in the countries that they were coming from. And there was all kinds of propaganda and narrative storytelling about how evil and horrible these people were, to get the US citizens that existed at that time to want to go to, World War I and World War II on a large global scale. And so the US is really, really good at that. And now we're seeing that they're using the same exact tactic to take on smaller countries and smaller islands in the Caribbean with a lot of resources. We're also seeing that on the continent of Africa, the unification of a lot of the African nations coming together and saying that we're not going to allow this colonialism. We're not going to allow these narratives to continue. And I do think that Palestine has allowed the world to be in consideration of folks that are not always subscribing to manufactured consent and subscribing to these narratives, because now their technology is allowing more voice to be heard against Western civilization and all of these things. And the data is aggregating that all of the lies that are coming out of white supremacy and things like that. So there's more of a challenge because we have more resources to challenge it.
Right. Like right now, they're saying there's a ceasefire, but yet they've killed almost 900 people since the ceasefire began. And so none of it is real, and for those of you who maybe haven't heard manufacturing consent, that term before, as I came to understand it, it was just, what is the story that's being told to me that somewhere in my brain gives me permission to believe that the story justifies somebody being harmed in one way, shape, or form, or justifies somebody doing something to someone else, whether it's a nation state or it's a government to its people or it's a government to somebody else's people. And Venezuela, you and I were talking about, Venezuela is just that it's the sweet spot in that part of the world where Trump believes that he's got an in because of the government is in a certain way that allows him to manipulate and bully and make his way into that part of the world. But it's not just Venezuela. He sees, but the story to manufacture consent is they're drug dealers, they're narco traffickers. That's their favorite term. I can't even believe you can pronounce it. And that's the justification for blowing up these boats, that he has no idea who's in them. He has no idea why they're out in international waters, because it's none of his business, quite frankly. And yet that's the story that he keeps telling, which then to us in the US and others around the world that might be watching the narrative, the story that he's pushing and that his government is pushing, they're saying, look, we're doing a good thing. We're trying to stop drugs from coming into the country. And isn't that a good thing? So just turn your head away from the 83 people that we've killed extrajudicially. Just pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And the consent comes from us as the people that are taking in the story. The consent comes from us. So either we consent by being quiet and letting it keep happening with no outcry and no attempt at repercussion or accountability, or we don't. And, that's why so many people that are like, oh, I don't know, Palestine is complicated. There's two sides. This needs to be, it's like, it's not two. It's either it's a genocide or it's not. And if you're quiet about it, then that means you're okay with genocide. And so it just, and that I think the reason why that's so hard to get through people's heads is because we've had generations after generation after generation, the entire history of this country, the US, and then others, under this guise of manufactured consent. We're so used to being told what to believe when it comes to justifying harm that that critical thinking skill is just not even there.
And I would offer that because of this this ideology of like anti-Blackness. Is it an ideology? I don't want to call it that. It's just like, it's easy to have this manufactured consent be accepted because people are so often easy to accept these negative narratives about non-white people. it's easy to accept this narrative that out of Venezuela, out of Colombia, like I'm naming things just that we hear about on the news, out of Colombia, out of Mexico, as like nothing that comes out of those resources, their GDP is drugs, which is not the truth when we know that the largest demand and usage of drugs is like through the United States, like one of the biggest user. We consume most of all of the things, both good and bad, that comes with product from
we are the consumers. We are that sandworm from Andor that comes up out of the sand and swallows everything. That is us.
So, and most of the time we're the ones that are supplying the resources to allow, a lot of the product to be created, developed, and then transported back across the US. So that becomes because it's easy for people to accept these stories that there's negativity, badness, ugliness that is coming out of non-white communities, peoples, countries, nations. And so like checking in with that, being able to like visit and speak to and experience other people and other cultures and other narratives other than the ones that are coming out of the US for US's gain and sole opportunity to try to maintain its position of power across the globe. That's what we're really seeing when we see this type of manufactured consent. It's
power.
And it's not going to be sustainable for the US because there's enough people, I'm repeating myself, there's enough people that are like standing up against a lot of these things. Like CARICOM is coming together to really claim that they want to make sure that there's a zone of peace in the Caribbean, that they have their own agency for their economic development, that they can create and partner with the allies that they choose that are actually going to be most helpful and effective. Now, making sure that they're doing that in the way that is healthiest for the economies of these smaller island nations, especially in the Caribbean, is really important. And being able to have a network of support when you're going up against big military powers, which the U.S. does have. So
yeah. How is it in Jamaica? I know, of course, everybody's in survival mode, for lack of a better way to say it, after the hurricane. But what have you been hearing on the island since you moved there about, and as these things are bubbling up, how is it landing on you as a new resident of Jamaica?
So as a new resident, people in the communities, and again, I'm in the western side of the island, so that's the part of the island that was most impacted by Hurricane Melissa. And most of the people are very unhappy with the way that Jamaican government is dealing with what's happening in the Caribbean waters in regards to Trump and becoming a military superpower in international waters, and also the relationship that the Prime Minister is continuing to uphold with U.S. administration. There's a real big frustration with that. And Jamaica has a very strong history of opposing its administration when its administration is not dealing with the way that people would want it to deal with. So I have a perfect example of, like, I think I might have mentioned this on one of our other podcast episodes, but like car seats, where they tried to mandate car seats for children. And that just wasn't like something that the community actually could accommodate. There was not money. There was not enough resources for cars and car seats. So that's just something that just, because the people say it not happen, it's not gonna happen. and that's the truth about the reality when your laws don't meet what the resources are to meet the needs of the people. And Jamaicans are very vocal about not conforming in the way that we experience in the U.S.
Now, do they then take that law that nobody's following because because of the reasons, and then arrest a lot of people for not following the laws, or does the law just disappear?
Yeah, just the law has absolutely.
See, that's the difference in the USians. They would use that. So many. How often is a law created in this country in the history? Sometimes even because they know the resources aren't there and they know people can't follow it, and it gives them a reason. There's that manufactured consent, a reason to arrest them and incarcerate them. Hence the 13th Amendment. So,
over criminalizing communities for non-crimes is another part of anti-Blackness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Over criminalizing people and over surveilling people for poverty,
Right.
for lack of resource, for lack of food. Those are the things that the U.S. has like systemically kind of integrating into the prison industrial complex to kind of fill prisons, because that's a system of money,
money,
economy,
and slavery and modern day slavery. Absolutely.
100%. So I don't know enough. That's what I should say. I don't know enough, having been on the island for only a year and a half, to know what that system looks like. But what I do know is that when there is not a resource that most of community can't follow, they're just not going to follow it, and no one is going to arrest them for that type of thing.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, that's good. That's at least, I mean, I'm glad to know that their system is such that they're not then criminalizing everybody because they can't follow the rule that's impossible
and
for them to
they
follow.
wouldn't be able to enforce it, because there's what I have experienced on the island, there is a different relationship with law enforcement than what you experience on the US. Again, because the people who are in law enforcement are really a part of the community. These are small islands. These are small. So it's, it's going to be somebody's cousin, somebody's brother, like for real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you dealing with this thing in a legal way, you're going home to your community, and your community is not scared of law enforcement in the same way. They're really not. It's I mean, the things that I've seen in Jamaica compared to like in the US, people like, why are you stopping me? That's like the get out the car and like, don't you, look a cuss out. Cuss out.
Yeah.
Before you actually get to dealing with whatever law is being broken. And then there's a conversation about what that is. It's like, you can challenge what has been said in some way, shape, or form. And so that it's a culturally different experience to like try to compare.
Gotcha.
But what I do know is that the energy and the temperament of most people in Jamaica, if something doesn't seem to work for the people, for like the actual people, it's not going to go for it. It's going to be really hard to actually make it enforceable to anyone. Truthfully.
Do you think that makes them, as a community, do you think it makes them less susceptible to a manufacturing consent manipulation?
I believe that I've experienced and witnessed that community will create its own manufactured consents for different things, for just beliefs. Like there was a conversation that Melissa was manufactured, the hurricane was manufactured by the US as a part of what's going on in the Caribbean, because Trump has put his eyes on the Caribbean. And so if you wipe out half of one of like the largest islands in the Caribbean, and you need resources, and then you have to develop some type of relationship with the US as one of the resources, with China as another huge resource. So a lot of like community in was talking about, they made this hurricane because we didn't have the same environmental impacts that happen when there's a major weather thing happen. It's just a hurricane out of the blue that comes and wipes out the side of an island that typically doesn't. So that means that they were directing it in a specific way. So that's the type of manufactured consent that's a little bit different. Conspiracy theory or not.
Yeah, because that's a little more, I feel like manufactured consent, what makes it so is that there's a result that happens that a population of people or a community turns a blind eye to, or says it's okay to, whereas maybe normally they wouldn't. And so that to me feels different than an idea or a story or a narrative that's happening within a community about something specifically. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and there's two folds, because like not so much racism that you experience on the island of Jamaica, but lots of classism.
Okay.
Right? So a bit of it would be turning a blind eye to the fact that one of the most resourced areas of the island was purposely wiped out when it typically wouldn't be the targeted area, so that those that are in power can build these AI communities. What are they called? Smart cities. So that's like one of the things that's happened. And so that is what the conversation is, because there has been like a constructive goal to do smart cities in Jamaica. And now one of the most beautiful parts of the island is wiped out.
has been clear cut as they do in the US routinely.
And it's
Yeah.
going to be really hard people know the land and they know their land, but it's going to be really hard without the papers to prove that that land is yours. And the government come in with, their surveyors and say, this is not yours, this is ours now, or put, taxes and things like that people are not going to be able to be resourced to come up with at this time. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in that respect.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, when we were talking about this topic, there were a couple of things that I wanted to share with folks, and we love to tell you about books around here. So, so this book that I wanted to let folks know about is called Manufacturing Consent. It's by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky. And if you're watching our podcast today, you can see there's a QR code that just popped up in the upper left corner, and you can scan that to order this book through Bookshop, or you can go to your library. I know that using your library card is always a very important thing to do to support local libraries. So, but this talks a lot about, the subtitle is The Political Economy of the Mass Media. And so it's got more of a USian framework, thinking about how the US media uses its 24-hour news cycle to manufacture consent within the USian citizenship.
Absolutely.
And so it'll open your eyes for sure.
And mass media is changing. The representation and how news is being told in the US now is really following this path of 2025.
Yeah, because it used to be that the news told you the news, and maybe even that's wrong to say that it used to be that. There are many people that would say the media has always been a propaganda machine.
Absolutely.
But if you look back at news clips of back in the 60s, or even into the 70s, and you watch like Walter Cronkite and some of the big names that we used to see on the screen, there was nothing glamorous about it. He got up there usually with a lit cigarette in his hand and the stream of smoke going around his head, and he was just telling you what was happening around the country. It was not the entertainment fanfare, ad push, that kind of thing that you see now. I'd like to think that the stories were a little more based in truth because it was so boring and dry, and but I might be wrong. So,
well, I would offer that the way manufactured consent was happening, or has happened with news media, is the types of stories that they choose to tell, right? What they focus on and how they vilify and who it is that they vilify. And I think that the U.S. has been particularly masterful in that.
Really good at that. Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to suggest to folks before we go, because I know we are all a video consuming world. Yes. This is a movie that came out in 1997, so it's been around, but it holds up. It's called Wag the Dog.
All right.
For those of you who are listening and not watching, I've got a picture of Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro on the screen. They're the lead, and Hayes is in this as well. And the story is Dustin Hoffman is a film producer, and Robert De Niro works for the government, works for the president. And I think the president at the time is going through a particularly rough time in the polls, probably leading up to an election, if I remember correctly. And Robert De Niro approaches Dustin Hoffman to do some sort of manipulation to create some storyline that will make the president look better in the eyes of the public so that he'll go up in the polls. And eventually what they end up doing is creating a war. Now, they didn't necessarily create a real war. They created a manufactured war. So it's all on video, and Dustin's coming up with the ideas and how can we do this? And we need the girl, and what is she carrying? And, it's terrifying to watch, but it's a really good representation of what we are talking about today with manufacturing consent, and how easily we can be drawn in to these stories and to these narratives about something that needs to happen solely for the purpose of propagandizing somebody else that were trying to uphold power, get into power, maintain their power, triple their power. And so I wanted to just put a plug in for that. I think you can still find it on Netflix. Sorry for the plug for the streaming, but yeah, it's, if you haven't, did you ever see it? Do you remember if you ever saw it?
I don't remember, but then I don't remember, and I don't hold movies. But I did just look up some like current things.
Okay.
On Black Mirror, there was an episode like Men Against Fire that you can see that kind of speaks into manufacturing consent.
Okay.
American Factory, a 2019 documentary about the cultural clash that occurs when Chinese companies take over a former General Motors plant. So
American Factory, that was?
Yeah, American Factory.
Okay.
And so that was 2019. And then Black Mirror is the one that's like more contemporary if people are interested in checking.
Okay. So American Factory, that was 2019.
Yeah.
And then a Black Mirror episode. What was the name of the episode?
Let me look again. Because it is.
I'll put all of these things for those of you who are listening or you're driving or whatever. I'll put all of these links in the notes so that you can.
Fire.
Men Against Fire. Okay.
Yeah. So.
All right.
So you can find out, you can learn a little bit about manufacturing consent and be on the lookout for it in the way that you're receiving information about what's going on across the globe.
Yeah. I mean, it's a question of always consider the source. Always consider the source of the information that you're getting. Do your best to, and always look at it with a critical lens, and just know that even when people are coming to you with the best of intentions, last episode we talked about intent versus impact. Even if somebody's coming to you with the best of intentions, they still have a story to tell. And there's a reason that they tell it in the way that they tell it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have some nefarious aim, but it just means that we always have to be in consideration of the lens that people see things through and how they tell us about it. Even you and I. I mean, that's why we started this podcast, right? Because I see things through a different lens than you do. And we found that these dialogues were really informative for both of us. I mean, before, I've said something about whiteness. You're like, oh my God, I need to know more. Tell me.
Yes, I remember. What are you doing?
I never thought of that before. Tell me more. So, I mean, it's super important, especially in the days of AI and how easy it is to make things look a certain way. And it's just getting easier and easier every day, and harder for you to realize that it's been manipulated. So you just always have to assume that people are trying to manipulate you somehow, and then figure out what that is. And it means more work, but at least you feel like you're engaging in it instead of just letting it fill your head. And, that's not good either. So. Anyway, well, thank you, my friend.
Thank you too. Always for this conversation.
Yeah, we'll see you again on the next episode.
Absolutely. Bless.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.